The ice cubes hit the floor with a hollow rattle, instantly drowned out by the sticky, dark fizz of Coca-Cola dripping from her apron onto her worn sneakers. The entire restaurant went silent. Then the laughter started, cruel, high-pitched, and echoing off the mahogany walls. They thought it was just a prank. They thought she was just a waitress, a nobody they could humiliate for a TikTok video. They didn't know the man sitting in the corner booth, watching with eyes cold as steel, wasn't just a customer. He was her husband. And he didn't just own the building. He owned the bank that held their trust funds. Today they wanted a show. They were about to get a lesson in power they would never forget. The dinner rush at the Obsidian Room, one of New York City's most exclusive private dining clubs, was not for the faint of heart. It was a place where deals worth millions were whispered over plates of Wagyu beef and bottles of wine that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. Harper wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, careful not to smear her minimal makeup. She adjusted the heavy tray on her shoulder, navigating the narrow space between tables with the grace of a dancer. To the patrons of the Obsidian Room, she was invisible. She was a pair of hands pouring water, a shadow clearing plates, a non-entity in a black vest and white button-down. That was exactly how Harper liked it. Nobody looked twice at the woman with the messy bun and the sensible shoes. Nobody noticed the diamond ring she usually wore was currently tucked safely in the velvet pouch inside her locker in the staff room. And certainly nobody suspected that the struggling waitress filling in for a sick friend was actually Harper Sterling, wife of Ethan Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Vanguard, a private equity firm that had recently acquired half the commercial real estate in Manhattan. "Table 4 needs a refill on the sparkling Harper," hissed Gary, the floor manager. Gary was a man whose stress levels were permanently set to catastrophe. He snapped his fingers near her face. "And smile. You look like you're at a funeral." "On it, Gary," Harper said, her voice calm. She didn't mind the work. In fact, she missed it. Before she met Ethan, before the galas and the board meetings and the endless charity luncheons, she had worked double shifts at a diner in Queens to put herself through nursing school. Tonight, her best friend from those days, Sarah, had called in a panic with the flu, terrified of losing her job at this high-stakes venue. Harper hadn't hesitated. "I'll cover you. Nobody knows my face there. It's fine." It was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday, but as Harper moved toward table 4, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. A group of 4 20-somethings walked in, bringing a gust of cold air and loud, entitled energy with them. They were led by a young man in a flashy Balenciaga jacket that looked out of place among the bespoke suits of the other diners. This was Chad Kensington, son of a real estate mogul whose empire was currently crumbling, though Chad acted like he still owned the world. Hanging on his arm was Jessica Thorne, no relation to the forbidden names, just a coincidence of high society. An influencer whose entire personality was curated for an Instagram grid. Flanking them were 2 hangers-on, distinct only by their loud watches and louder laughter. They bypassed the hostess stand entirely. "We'll take the booth in the center," Chad announced, pointing to a reserved table. "Sir," the hostess, a terrifyingly polite woman named Beatrice, stepped in. "That table is reserved for Mr. Sterling. He is expected shortly." Harper froze mid-pour at a nearby table. Ethan was coming? He hadn't mentioned dinner here. He usually worked late on Tuesdays. Chad laughed, a barking sound that made several diners look up in annoyance. "Sterling, the guy's a dinosaur. He won't mind. Besides, do you know who my father is? Just seat us, and bring a round of Cokes. We're parched." Beatrice looked flustered, her eyes darting around the room. She hated confrontation. "I will see what I can do, sir." They sat down at the reserved table anyway, shoving the reserved placard aside like it was trash. Harper's heart beat a little faster. If Ethan walked in and saw her waiting tables, he wouldn't be angry. He'd be confused. And if he saw these kids treating the staff like dirt, he'd be furious. Ethan Sterling had a very low tolerance for bullies. He had grown up with nothing, fighting for every scrap of success, and he loathed those who had everything handed to them and treated it with disdain. "Harper," Gary snapped, shoving a tray of glass bottles into her hands. "Table 7, the loud ones. Get them their sodas before they make a scene." Harper took a deep breath. Just do the job. 2 more hours. Help Sarah keep her job. Go home. She approached the table. The group was already loud, scrolling through their phones, their voices cutting through the ambient jazz music. "So I told him," Jessica was saying, examining her perfectly manicured nails, "if you don't buy me the G-Wagon, don't expect me to go to the Hamptons with your mother. It's simple leverage." "Brutal, Jess. I love it." Chad snickered. He looked up as Harper arrived. His eyes scanned her, not seeing a person, but an object to be used. "Finally. Took you long enough. Did you have to brew the soda yourself?" "My apologies, sir," Harper said, keeping her voice neutral. She began to place the glasses on the table. "Can I get you anything else to start?" "Yeah," Chad said, leaning back and putting his feet up on the empty chair next to him. "You can get a better attitude. You didn't even smile when you walked up. Isn't that part of the job description? Look pretty and serve?" Harper felt a flash of irritation, but pushed it down. "I'll give you a moment with the menus." "Wait," Jessica said, holding up a hand. She pulled out her phone and hit record. "Do it again." "Excuse me?" Harper asked. "Pour the drink again. The lighting was bad. I want to get a boomerang of the fizz," Jessica demanded, holding the phone inches from Harper's face. "I can't pour it again, miss. It's already in the glass," Harper said patiently. "Then get another one," Chad snapped. "God, are you deaf or just stupid? Fetch another Coke, and make it fast." Harper tightened her grip on the serving tray. This was the hard karma waiting to happen. She nodded once, stiffly. "Right away." As she turned to leave, she saw him. Ethan Sterling walked through the front doors. He didn't look like a billionaire. He wore a simple charcoal coat and no tie. But the way the air in the room seemed to bend around him, the way the owner of the restaurant rushed out from the back to greet him. That was the tell. Ethan's eyes scanned the room. He wasn't looking for a table. He was looking for her. Harper ducked her head, praying the large pillar in the center of the room would shield her. She rushed to the bar, her heart hammering against her ribs. "1 Coca-Cola," she told the bartender, her voice tight. "Rough table?" the bartender asked sympathetically. "You have no idea." Harper risked a glance around the pillar. Ethan was standing near the entrance, speaking quietly with the owner, Mr. Cavallari. Ethan looked tired. He rubbed his temple, a gesture she knew meant he had a headache. He glanced at the booth where Chad and Jessica were sitting, his reserved booth. His jaw tightened, but he didn't make a scene. He simply gestured for Mr. Cavallari to seat him at a small, obscure table in the corner, one with a direct line of sight to the loud group. He hadn't seen her yet. Harper took the fresh soda. She had to drop this off, and then ask Gary to move her to the back section. She couldn't serve Ethan. It would be too awkward, and she didn't want to distract him if he was here for a quiet moment. She walked back to table 7. "Finally," Chad groaned as she approached. "We were about to die of thirst." "Here is your drink, sir," Harper said, placing the glass down. "No, no, no," Jessica said, pointing her phone again. "Hold the bottle up high. Pour it like dramatic." "Miss, this is a fine dining establishment, not a nightclub," Harper said, her patience fraying. "I can't—" "Do it!" Chad slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "The customer is always right. Isn't that the rule? We're paying for this service. Pour the damn drink how she wants it." Harper exhaled. She lifted the glass bottle. She tilted it, letting the dark liquid stream into the glass with a satisfying fizz. Jessica was filming, pouting at the camera, then panning up to Harper's face. "Smile," Jessica commanded. Harper offered a tight, polite smile. "Ugh, that's so fake," Jessica laughed, lowering the phone. "You look miserable. Maybe you should find a new job, like cleaning toilets? That seems more your speed." The table erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, jagged sound. Harper set the bottle down. "Enjoy your drinks." She turned to leave. "Hey," Chad called out. Harper stopped and turned back. "Yes?" "You missed a spot," Chad said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Before Harper could process what was happening, Chad grabbed the full glass of Coca-Cola she had just poured. With a fluid, practiced motion, like he had done this a dozen times before at frat parties, he flicked his wrist. The cold, sugary liquid hit Harper square in the chest. It splashed up her neck, soaking her white collar, dripping down her apron, and splashing onto her face. The ice cubes clattered onto the wooden floor. The shock was immediate. The cold took her breath away. But the silence that followed was worse. The entire restaurant seemed to inhale at once. Then came the laughter. "Oh my God!" Jessica shrieked, cackling. "Did you get that? Tell me you got that." "Bullseye!" Chad hooted, high-fiving one of the hangers-on. "Look at her. She looks like a wet rat." Harper stood frozen, soda dripping from her eyelashes. The sticky liquid was already seeping through her shirt, chilling her skin. She felt a burning sensation in her eyes, humiliation, hot and fierce. She wasn't Mrs. Sterling right now. She was just a waitress who had been assaulted for the amusement of a trust fund baby. "What is the matter with you?" Harper whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with suppressed rage. "It was a joke, relax," Chad scoffed, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I'll tip you extra for the dry cleaning. Now go get me a refill, and don't spill it this time." Gary, the manager, came rushing over, looking pale. But instead of defending Harper, he looked at Chad's expensive jacket and the black card sitting on the table. "I'm so sorry, sir," Gary apologized to Chad. "So sorry for the disturbance. Harper, go to the back and clean yourself up immediately. You are disrupting the guests." Harper looked at Gary, disbelief warring with anger. "He threw a drink on me, Gary." "And you are making a scene," Gary hissed under his breath. "Go now, or don't bother coming back." Harper wiped the soda from her eyes. She straightened her spine. She was about to speak, about to tell Gary exactly where he could shove his job and reveal exactly who she was. But she didn't have to, because a chair scraped loudly against the floor in the corner of the room. The sound was heavy and deliberate. It cut through the murmurs of the restaurant. Heavy footsteps approached, slow, rhythmic, dangerous. "Gary!" a deep voice rumbled. It wasn't a shout, but it carried more weight than a scream. Gary spun around, his face draining of all color. Mr. Sterling, I didn't know you were... I apologize for the mess. We are handling it." Ethan Sterling ignored the manager entirely. He didn't look at the spilled soda on the floor. He didn't look at the shattered ice. He walked straight up to Harper. His eyes were dark, filled with a terrifyingly quiet storm. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pristine white handkerchief, and gently, with infinite tenderness, wiped a streak of brown soda from Harper's cheek. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, meant only for her. "I'm fine, Ethan," she murmured, her voice shaking slightly. "It's just soda." It's not just soda, Ethan said. He turned slowly to face the table. Chad was still grinning, though it faltered slightly as he took in the man standing before him. He didn't recognize Ethan immediately. Chad was the type of person who only memorized the faces of people he wanted to borrow money from. "Who's this?" Chad sneered, trying to regain control of the room. "Your boyfriend? Look, buddy, she spilled the drink. I just helped her." "Be quiet," Ethan said. It was spoken so calmly that Chad actually shut his mouth. Ethan looked at Chad. He looked at the Balenciaga jacket. He looked at the black credit card on the table, a platinum Amex issued by Sterling Vanguard Bank. Ethan picked up the credit card. He held it between two fingers, inspecting it like it was a dirty tissue. "Hey, put that down!" Chad barked, standing up. "That's my property." Ethan looked at the name on the card. Chadwick Kensington II. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Chad's. "Your father is Robert Kensington, correct?" "Yeah," Chad puffed out his chest. "So you know who I am. Now give me my card back before I buy this place and fire your girlfriend." Ethan's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a shark's smile. "You won't be buying anything, Chadwick," Ethan said. "Not today. Not ever again." Ethan pulled out his own phone. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. The room was deathly silent. "Connect me to the Fraud and Risk Department," Ethan said into the phone. "Authorization code Alpha 01, Sterling." A voice on the other end answered immediately. "Mr. Sterling, how can we assist?" "I'm holding a card ending in 4092, issued to a Chadwick Kensington," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Chad's face. "Cancel it." "What?" Chad laughed nervously. "You can't do that. Who do you think you are?" "Cancelled, sir," the voice on the phone said. "Anything else?" "Yes," Ethan said coldly. "Flag all assets connected to the Kensington family trust managed by our firm. Immediate freeze, pending an internal audit regarding conduct violations." Chad's face went white. "You can't." Ethan dropped the credit card into the glass of melted ice and backwash. It landed with a soft plip. "I just did," Ethan said. "Now, apologize to my wife." The word wife hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. For a dreadful few seconds, nobody moved. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of conversations had completely ceased. Every eye was fixed on the drama unfolding in the center booth. Chad Kensington stared at Ethan Sterling, his brain trying to compute the impossible data it had just received. The man in the charcoal coat, who exuded the kind of quiet power that made CEOs nervous, was claiming the sticky, soda-drenched waitress was his wife. "You're lying," Chad blurted out, his voice cracking. He looked from the Titan of Wall Street to the woman in the stained apron. "That's ridiculous. Look at her. She's a nobody. She's serving me drinks." Jessica Thorne, sensing the tectonic shift in the room's power dynamic, immediately dropped her phone. It clattered onto the table, the recording abruptly ending. She physically recoiled from Chad, scooting inches away on the leather banquette, as if his sudden misfortune was contagious. "Ethan," Jessica breathed, her voice suddenly breathy and sycophantic. She recognized him now. Everyone in their social circle knew of Ethan Sterling, the man who had turned a small inheritance into an empire that dwarfed her own father's wealth. "Oh my God, Mr. Sterling, I had no idea. If you had known she was wealthy, you would have treated her with respect." Ethan finished for her, his voice dripping with disdain. "But because you thought she was help, you thought she was a target." Ethan didn't look at Jessica. His gaze remained fixed on Chad, who was currently looking at his American Express card floating in the dregs of the Coca-Cola. "I'm waiting for that apology, Chadwick," Ethan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the unbreakable density of a bank vault door closing. Chad's face turned a mottled red. His ego, inflated by 24 years of consequence-free existence, was warring with the sudden, terrifying reality of his situation. "Look, man, it was just a joke, a prank, for TikTok. You know how it is." "I don't," Ethan said. "Explain the humor to me. Explain to me why assaulting a woman who is bringing you water is funny." Chad stammered. He looked around for support, but his hangers-on were staring at the floor, and Jessica was actively trying to make eye contact with Ethan to plead her innocence. "She had a bad attitude," Chad tried, his voice weak. Ethan took one step forward. It was a small movement, but Chad flinched violently. "My wife," Ethan said, articulating every syllable, "spent 8 hours on her feet today, volunteering to help a friend who was too sick to come to work so she wouldn't lose her livelihood. She did this because she is kind, a concept you are entirely unfamiliar with, and you repaid that kindness by treating her like garbage because you felt small and needed someone to kick." Harper stepped out from behind Ethan. She didn't want him fighting all her battles. She felt sticky, gross, and furious, but she wouldn't hide. She looked at Chad. Really looked at him. Without the armor of his father's money, which was currently frozen in the digital ether, he looked pathetic. A boy in a man's expensive jacket. "You didn't hurt me," Harper said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "You just made a mess. That's all you people do. You make messes and expect others to clean them up because you think you can buy your way out of decency." She reached up and unclasped the pin holding her apron. It was heavy with the spilled soda. With a deliberate, calm motion, she pulled the apron over her head and dropped the sodden pile of fabric onto the table, right next to Chad's hand. It made a wet, sloppy sound. "Clean it up," Harper said. Chad looked at the apron as if it were radioactive. "What?" "You heard her," Ethan said. "We are leaving. By the time we reach the door, I expect that table to be spotless. If it isn't, the freeze on your family's assets turns into a seizure protocol. I will call in every loan your father has outstanding by close of business tomorrow. He will be destitute by Friday." The color drained completely from Chad's face. He knew, vaguely, that his father's real estate empire was highly leveraged. He knew they owed banks a lot of money. He just hadn't realized which bank held the leash. Ethan put his arm around Harper, pulling her close, oblivious to the sticky soda on her shirt, transferring to his expensive coat. "Gary!" Ethan called out without turning around. The manager, who had been trying to merge with the wallpaper near the kitchen door, shuffled forward, trembling. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Again, I am so sorry." "Save your apologies for someone who cares," Ethan said coldly. "Bring me the bill for this table, everything they ordered. The steak, the wine, the 5 Coca-Colas." Gary blinked. "Bring you the bill, sir?" "Yes. I'm paying for it." Ethan smiled a grim smile. "Because Chadwick here can't." Gary scurried off. Chad stared, horrified. "You can't do that. That's humiliating." "That's the point," Ethan said. Gary returned in record time with the leather check presenter. Ethan produced his own card, a sleek, black titanium rectangle that looked heavier than Chad's plastic Amex. He handed it to Gary. While the transaction processed, Chad sat paralyzed. Jessica was silently crying, ruining her makeup. The other 2 friends had already slipped out the side door, abandoning the sinking ship. "It's taken care of, Mr. Sterling," Gary whispered, handing the card back with trembling hands. Ethan took the receipt. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it onto the table next to the wet apron. "Come on, Harper. Let's go home," Ethan said softly, his demeanor changing instantly as he looked at his wife. They turned and walked toward the exit. The entire restaurant watched them go. No one spoke. As they reached the heavy oak doors, they heard a sound behind them. It was the frantic squeak of napkins rubbing against wood. Chad Kensington was on his hands and knees, frantically wiping up spilled Coca-Cola. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of Robert Kensington's Upper East Side penthouse, but it brought no warmth. The air inside the sprawling apartment was toxic with panic. Robert Kensington, a man who usually projected an image of golden, untouchable success, was currently purple-faced, screaming into an iPhone that looked tiny in his beefy hand. "What do you mean, account frozen due to breach of covenant?" Robert bellowed, pacing across a Persian rug that cost more than most people's college tuition. "I have 50 million in that operating account. I have contractors to pay in Dubai. Unfreeze it. Do you know who I am?" The voice on the other end of the line, a high-level VP at Sterling Vanguard Bank, was unimpressed. "We know exactly who you are, Mr. Kensington. The freeze originated from the executive office. A morality clause violation was triggered regarding the behavior of a primary beneficiary of the family trust. Specifically, your son, Chadwick." Robert stopped pacing. The blood drained from his face. "Chad? What did the idiot do now? Did he crash the Ferrari again?" "It appears he assaulted a member of Mr. Sterling's family in a public venue last night. The breach is severe. We are reviewing all outstanding lines of credit for immediate recall." The line went dead. Robert stared at the phone. Immediate recall. That meant they wanted all the money back. Now. He didn't have it. His entire empire was a house of cards built on cheap debt and optimistic projections. If Sterling pulled the rug, it was over. Not just bankruptcy, ruin. The Hamptons house, the yacht, the penthouse, the social standing, gone. The elevator doors in the foyer pinged open. Chad walked in. He looked awful. His eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night of panic, and he was wearing yesterday's clothes, stained with sweat and the lingering scent of dried Coca-Cola. Robert slowly turned to face his son. The look in his eyes was terrifying. "Dad," Chad started, his voice raspy. "Something weird happened with my card last night. I think the bank made a mistake." Robert didn't speak. He walked across the room, grabbed a baccarat crystal vase from a side table, and hurled it at the wall just inches from Chad's head. The vase shattered with a deafening crash. Glass shards rained down on the marble floor. Chad yelped and pressed himself against the elevator doors. "Dad, what the hell?" "You moron," Robert roared, his voice shaking the walls. "You entitled, stupid, useless moron! What did you do last night? Who did you mess with?" "It was nothing. It was just some waitress at the Obsidian Room," Chad yelled back, defensive now. "She was being bitchy, so I threw a drink on her. It was a joke." "A waitress," Robert repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He walked closer until he was nose to nose with his son. "You threw a drink on Ethan Sterling's wife." Chad's jaw dropped. "There's no way. That's what he said, but she was working. Why would a billionaire's wife be waiting tables?" "I don't care why she was doing it," Robert screamed, spit flying. "I care that Ethan Sterling, the man who owns the debt on everything we possess, just froze our entire existence because you wanted a laugh. We are finished, Chad. Done. Do you understand? We will be on the street by Monday because of you." Chad finally understood the gravity of what happened. The invincibility shield he had worn his entire life shattered. He slid down against the wall, putting his head in his hands. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Fix it," Robert snarled, turning away in disgust. "I don't care how you do it. Grovel. Beg. Find her and offer her my car, my watch, anything. Just get him to unlock the accounts." While the Kensingtons imploded, across town, in a penthouse that was quieter, larger, and infinitely more tasteful, Harper sat at a granite kitchen island, nursing a cup of coffee. She was wearing one of Ethan's oversized cashmere sweaters, clean and dry, but she still felt the phantom stickiness of the soda on her skin. The humiliation burned slower today, replaced by a dull ache of realization. She had tried so hard to keep her two worlds separate, and they had violently collided. Ethan walked in, already dressed in a suit that cost more than the Kensington's car. He kissed the top of her head. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. "Like I was the main attraction at a circus last night," she murmured. Sarah called. She saw the video. "Someone posted it before you shut it down." "She feels terrible." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She has nothing to apologize for. And the video is scrubbed. Our IT team spent the night erasing it from every platform. It doesn't exist anymore." He walked around the island and leaned against it, crossing his arms. His eyes, usually so warm when he looked at her, were hard as flint. "I'm going to crush them, Harper," he said, stating it as a simple fact. "Robert Kensington has been playing fast and loose with our money for years. I tolerated it because he was insignificant. But now, his leverage is gone. I'm calling in his loans at 9 a.m. By noon, he'll be insolvent." Harper looked up at him. She loved this man fiercely. She loved his protectiveness, but she knew where this road led. Ethan, when wronged, didn't just seek justice. He sought annihilation. It came from growing up with nothing and having to fight for everything. "Ethan," she said softly, "he's a jerk. His son is a monster. But do we have to destroy their entire lives? Isn't what you did last night enough? You humiliated him. You took away his toy." "It's not enough," Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. "People like Chad Kensington don't learn from humiliation. They only learn from loss. Total, absolute loss. If I let them skate by, they'll just do it to someone else next week. Someone who doesn't have me in their corner." Harper knew he was right, but it still felt cruel. "It just feels dirty. Getting down in the mud with them." "I'm not in the mud, sweetheart," Ethan said, leaning over to kiss her forehead again. "I own the land the mud is sitting on, and I'm about to pave it over." He checked his watch. "I have to go to the office to sign the paperwork. Stay home today. Rest. I'll handle everything." He left, a titan going to war. Harper watched him go, a knot forming in her stomach. She knew Ethan would win. He always won. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the Kensingtons, desperate and cornered animals that they were, wouldn't just lie down and die. They would bite back, and they wouldn't aim for Ethan. They knew they couldn't hurt him. They would aim for her. Desperation is a dangerous fuel, and the Kensingtons were running on a full tank, while Ethan Sterling systematically dismantled their financial portfolio from his glass-walled office in Midtown, calling in loans, freezing assets, and triggering audit clauses that had been buried in fine print for a decade. Robert Kensington was not sitting idle. He was a man who had survived on Wall Street, not by being the smartest, but by being the dirtiest. "You're telling me she's nobody?" Robert paced around the small, smoke-filled office of a private investigator named Slade. It was a far cry from his usual environs, but desperate times called for discreet measures. Slade, a man with grease-stained cuffs and eyes that had seen too much, tossed a manila folder onto the cheap laminate desk. "Worse than nobody, Mr. Kensington. She's blue-collar. Queens born and raised. Father was a mechanic, mother was a school teacher. She put herself through nursing school, working double shifts at diners. She's currently a registered nurse at St. Jude's, but she's on leave." Robert picked up a photograph. It showed Harper in scrubs, looking exhausted, eating a sandwich on a park bench. He looked at it with a sneer of triumph. A nurse, Robert laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Ethan Sterling, the King of New York, married a bedpan changer from Queens. She's squeaky clean, though, Slade warned. No criminal record, no debts, pays her taxes early. Everyone I talk to says she's a saint. Nobody is a saint, Robert hissed. She's a gold digger. That's the angle. She snagged Sterling, and now she's playing the role of the high society wife. But she's an imposter. And if there's one thing the board members of Sterling Vanguard hate, it's a scandal involving low-class manipulation. Chad sat in the corner, chewing on his thumbnail. Dad, what's the plan? The bank called again. They're repossessing the Bentley tomorrow morning. Let them take the car, Robert snapped. We're going for the whole pot. Tonight is the Sterling Foundation Gala. It's the biggest event of the year. Every investor, every rival, every news outlet will be there. So? Chad asked. So, Robert's eyes gleamed with malice. We're going to go. We're going to apologize publicly. But before we do, we're going to leak this. He waved the file. We're going to paint a picture of a manipulative waitress who trapped a billionaire and is now abusing his power to destroy honest businessmen like us because of a petty grudge. We'll spin it that she attacked you, Chad, that she provoked you to get a reaction, filmed it, and then cried to her husband. Will people believe that? Chad asked dubiously. People believe whatever confirms their biases, Robert said smoothly. The elite don't want to believe a waitress belongs among them. They want to believe she's trash. We just have to give them permission to say it out loud. If we humiliate her enough, if we make her a liability, Ethan will have to cut her loose to save his company's reputation. And once he cuts her loose, he'll stop the attack on us to avoid a messy divorce war. It was a delusional plan, born of arrogance and panic, but to Robert Kensington, it looked like a lifeline. Meanwhile, at the Sterling penthouse, the mood was somber. Harper stood in front of a floor-length mirror, adjusting the strap of a midnight blue gown that cost more than her parents' house. It was stunning, shimmering like a night sky, but she felt like she was wearing a costume. You look breathtaking, Ethan said, appearing in the doorway. He was adjusting his cufflinks, looking every bit the master of the universe. I feel like a fraud, Harper admitted, turning to him. Ethan, maybe I shouldn't go. After yesterday, people will be talking. If the Kensingtons are ruined, people will know you did it for me. They'll say I'm vindictive. Ethan crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands. Let them talk. They fear me, Harper, and they will respect you. Not because of who I am, but because of who you are. You handled yourself with more dignity in that restaurant than any of those trust fund brats have shown in their entire lives. I just want it to be over, she sighed. I want to go back to being anonymous. I know, Ethan said, kissing her forehead. But tonight, we have to stand tall. The gala raises millions for the Children's Hospital. It's your passion. Don't let men like Chad Kensington take that away from you. Harper took a deep breath. He was right. She wasn't just a former waitress. She was a nurse, a wife, and a woman who had survived worse than spilled soda. Okay, she said, her eyes hardening. Let's go. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of diamonds, tuxedos, and champagne. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. A string quartet played softly in the corner, struggling to be heard over the roar of gossip. When Ethan and Harper entered, the room didn't go silent, but the volume dropped noticeably. Heads turned. Whispers fluttered behind hands like nervous birds. That's her, someone murmured. I heard she used to work at a diner. I heard she made Ethan bankrupt the Kensingtons. Harper held her head high, gripping Ethan's arm. She smiled politely, navigating the shark tank with the poise she had learned dealing with difficult patients in the ER. They made their way to the main table. The night seemed to be going smoothly. Speeches were made. Donations were pledged. Harper began to relax. Then the doors swung open. Robert and Chad Kensington walked in. They weren't invited. Their invitations had been rescinded that morning, but Robert had bribed a security guard who used to work for him. They strode into the room not with shame, but with an aggressive, wounded entitlement. Chad looked nervous, sweating in his tuxedo, but Robert looked like a man with a bomb strapped to his chest. "Ethan!" Robert's voice boomed across the room, interrupting a toast by the hospital administrator. The room gasped. Security started to move, but Ethan held up a hand to stop them. He stood up slowly, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "Robert," Ethan said, his voice carrying without shouting. "You are trespassing." "I'm here to set the record straight," Robert yelled, marching toward the stage. He grabbed a microphone from a stunned MC. "You all know me. You know my family. We've been part of this society for 50 years. And you know what is happening? This man," he pointed a shaking finger at Ethan, "is destroying my company, putting thousands out of work, all because of her." He pointed at Harper. "She's not one of us," Robert shouted, playing his ace card. "My investigator found the truth. She's a waitress from Queens, a nobody who tricked Ethan Sterling. My son, Chad, went to dinner, and she provoked him. She threw a drink on him first. It was a setup. And now, because my son defended himself against a gold-digging con artist, Ethan is ruining us." The room was deadly silent. The accusation hung in the air. It was a lie, a blatant, disgusting lie, but it was tailored to appeal to the worst instincts of the snobs in the room. "She's not one of us." Chad stepped up, emboldened by his father's audacity. "It's true," he lied, his voice trembling. "She spilled it on me intentionally. She called me names. She wanted a settlement." Harper felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye was on her. They were judging her, waiting for her to crumble. Ethan took a step forward, his fists clenched, ready to tear Robert apart physically if he had to. But Harper stopped him. She placed a hand on Ethan's chest. "No," she whispered. "Let me." Harper stepped out from behind the table. She didn't walk to the microphone. She just stood there in the center of the ballroom, looking at Robert Kensington with a pity that was more cutting than anger. "You're right, Mr. Kensington," Harper said. Her voice wasn't amplified, but in the silence of the room, it carried perfectly. "I am from Queens. My father was a mechanic. My mother was a teacher." She took a step closer to him. "And yes, I was a waitress. I worked double shifts on my feet for 8 years to pay for nursing school. I cleaned up spills. I took abuse from rude customers. And I smiled through it all because I had a goal. I wanted to save lives." She turned to the crowd. She made eye contact with the wealthy socialites. "I didn't trick Ethan," she said softly. "We met in the ER. He came in with a cut on his hand from a construction site tour. He didn't tell me who he was, and I treated him with the same care I treated the homeless man in the next bed. That is why he married me. Not because I'm one of you, but because I'm real." She turned back to Chad. "You say I provoked you? There is security footage, Chad. There is audio. You laughed while you threw that drink. You called me a wet rat. You humiliated me because you thought I was powerless." Harper paused, her voice rising with emotion. "But here is the thing about people like me. Waitresses, nurses, mechanics. We hold the world together while people like you play with it. You think being a waitress is an insult? It's a badge of honor. It means I know the value of $1. It means I know how to work. and it means I know exactly what a small, insecure bully looks like." The room erupted, not with boos but with applause. It started with the hospital staff at the back tables, then spread to the wives of the investors, and finally, the entire room was clapping. The hard karma of public opinion had swung violently against the Kensingtons. Robert's attempt to shame her had only highlighted her dignity and his own cruelty. Robert stood frozen, the microphone slipping from his hand. He looked around, realizing he had miscalculated everything. He hadn't exposed a fraud. He had crowned a queen. Ethan stepped up beside Harper, taking her hand. He looked at Robert with cold finality. "You wanted the truth, Robert?" Ethan said into the silence as the applause died down. "Here is the truth. The audit of your company finished an hour ago." Robert went pale. "What?" "We didn't just find debt," Ethan said. "We found embezzlement. You've been siphoning money from your investors' construction loans to pay for your personal debts for 5 years. That's federal fraud." The heavy double doors at the back of the room opened again. This time it wasn't guests. It was the FBI, flanked by NYPD officers. "Robert Kensington," an agent announced, walking through the crowd. "You are under arrest." The arrest was not the quiet, polite affair that high society scandals usually were. It was a spectacle, raw and visceral, playing out under the crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel. As the FBI agents moved through the parting crowd of socialites, the air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Robert Kensington, realizing the walls were closing in, didn't go quietly. He dropped the microphone, the feedback screeching through the speakers like a dying wail. "This is a mistake," Robert screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of violet. "You can't touch me. I am Robert Kensington. I know the mayor. I know the commissioner." "The commissioner signed the warrant, Mr. Kensington," the lead agent said, his voice flat and unimpressed. He spun Robert around, twisting the older man's arms behind his back. The metallic click-click of the handcuffs echoed louder than the string quartet ever had. The crowd, usually so composed, broke into a frenzy of whispers and camera flashes. The image of the untouchable real estate tycoon being manhandled like a common criminal was too potent to ignore. In the chaos, Chad Kensington panicked, seeing his father, his shield, his bank account, his god, shackled and shoved toward the exit. Chad's survival instinct kicked in. It was a cowardly, frantic instinct. He didn't rush to help his father. He turned and ran. He shoved past a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes, sending glass shattering across the marble floor. "Move! Get out of my way!" Chad shrieked, sprinting toward the service entrance near the kitchens. "Secure the exits!" the agent barked into his radio. Chad burst through the swinging kitchen doors, slipping on the slick tile. He scrambled up, his tuxedo jacket torn, breath heaving in his chest. He made it to the loading dock alleyway, the cold night air hitting his sweating face. He thought he was free. He thought he could run to the Hamptons, hide out, maybe access an offshore account. But as he turned the corner of the alley, a wall of blue uniforms met him. 2 NYPD officers were waiting, arms crossed, looking at the disheveled air with a mixture of pity and boredom. "Going somewhere, kid?" one officer asked. Chad collapsed. His knees hit the dirty pavement of the alleyway, the fight leaving him in a rush of tears. "My dad. He said he'd fix it. He always fixes it." "Not this time," the officer said, pulling Chad to his feet. The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines and gavels. The fall of the House of Kensington was total. It wasn't just a bankruptcy. It was an implosion. The newspapers called it the sterling checkmate. Every morning brought new revelations. The Kensington assets were frozen, then seized, then liquidated. The penthouse on the Upper East Side, the symbol of their dominance, was stripped bare. Movers hauled out the baccarat crystal, the Persian rugs, and the art collection, auctioning them off for pennies on the dollar to pay back the creditors' sterling vanguard had rallied. Robert Kensington was denied bail, deemed a flight risk due to his connections in non-extradition countries. He traded his bespoke Italian suits for an orange jumpsuit, awaiting a trial that promised a decade behind bars. But for Harper, the victory wasn't found in the headlines. It was found in the quiet moments. The night of the gala, after the police lights had faded and the adrenaline had crashed, she and Ethan sat on the balcony of their penthouse. The city lights of Manhattan sprawled out below them, a grid of gold and darkness. Harper curled her legs under her, watching the steam rise from her tea. "Did we go too far, Ethan?" Ethan looked up from his phone, where he had been reading the initial press release. "We didn't do anything to them, Harper. We just turned on the lights. The cockroaches scattered because they couldn't handle the exposure. Their crimes were their own. Their cruelty was their own. All we did was stop protecting them from the consequences." Harper nodded slowly. She knew he was right. Justice wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was a hammer. "I just hope Chad learns something from this. I hope he doesn't just become bitter." "That part," Ethan said, reaching out to stroke her hand, "is entirely up to him." 6 months later, New York City had thawed. The grey slush of winter was gone, replaced by the vibrant green of Central Park and the gentle warmth of May sunshine. Harper's life had returned to a beautiful, rhythmic normal. The scandal had faded from the news cycle, replaced by the next big thing. She was working 3 shifts a week at St. Jude's, not as the billionaire's wife, but simply as Nurse Sterling. One Tuesday afternoon, after a grueling 10-hour shift, Harper's stomach growled loud enough to be heard in the hallway. She decided to skip the healthy salad she had packed and indulged in a craving for grease and salt. She walked a few blocks to Burger Barn, a nostalgic, slightly run-down diner she used to frequent during her poorest days in nursing school. It smelled of frying oil and floor cleaner, a comforting, unpretentious scent. The place was slammed with the lunch rush. Construction workers, tourists, and students packed the red vinyl booths. Harper squeezed into a small 2-top table near the window. She pulled out her phone to check a message from Ethan. "Dinner at 7? I'm cooking," and smiled. "Welcome to Burger Barn. Here are your menus and silverware," a voice said, sounding exhausted and flat. Harper didn't look up immediately. "Thanks. I actually know what I want. Just the number 4 combo with a Diet Coke, please." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Harper?" The voice was barely a whisper. It was cracked, laced with disbelief and a sudden, sharp intake of breath. Harper froze. She knew that voice. She had heard it laugh at her while soda dripped down her neck. She had heard it scream lies into a microphone at the plaza. She slowly lifted her head. Standing there was Chad Kensington. But it wasn't the Chad she remembered. The Chad she knew wore Balenciaga and looked at the world with a sneer. This man was wearing a polyester uniform that was a size too big. He had a paper hat perched on messy hair. There were dark circles under his eyes. And his hands that had never done a day's work in their life, were red, chapped, and sporting a small burn mark on the thumb. He looked thinner. He looked defeated. He looked like someone who had learned the value of $1 the hard way. Chad stared at her, his face draining of color. He gripped the order pad so tightly his knuckles turned white. He looked at the door, as if calculating if he could run again. But he stayed put. He couldn't run. He needed this job. He needed the $15 an hour plus tips to pay rent on whatever small apartment he was now living in. "Chad," Harper said. Her voice was steady. There was no mockery in it, No gloating. Chad stammered, his eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching. I didn't know. I can get someone else to serve you. I'll go get the manager. He turned to flee, the shame radiating off him in waves. Chad, stop, Harper said. He froze, his back to her. I'm not here to get you fired, Harper said gently. I'm just here for a burger. Chad turned back slowly. His eyes were watery. The arrogance had been burned out of him, replaced by a raw, painful humility. He looked at the diamond ring on her finger, then down at his own grease-stained apron. My dad got 15 years, Chad said, his voice hollow. We lost everything. The house, the trust, even my friends. They all stopped answering my calls the day the accounts froze. I know, Harper said softly. I live in a studio in the Bronx now, he continued, the words spilling out like a confession he had been holding in for months. I take the subway. I work double shifts here. My feet hurt every single night. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Is this? He gestured to the diner, to the noise, to the hard work. Is this what it was like for you? When I made fun of you? Yes, Harper said. This is what it's like. You work hard, you get tired, and you hope people treat you with a little bit of decency. Chad lowered his head. A single tear escaped, tracking through the sheen of sweat on his cheek. I'm sorry, Harper. I'm really sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I was a monster. I didn't see you as a person. Harper studied him. She could see the change. It wasn't just the uniform, it was the soul. The entitlement had been stripped away, leaving a human being underneath. Karma hadn't just punished him, it had potentially saved him from becoming his father. Apology accepted, Harper said, and she meant it. Chad let out a long, shaky breath, wiping his face with his sleeve. Thank you. Truly. He clicked his pen. Number 4, Diet Coke. I'll make sure the fries are fresh. Thank you, Chad. He walked away toward the kitchen, not with a swagger, but with a hustle. Harper watched him go. She ate her meal in peace, watching the city move outside the window. When she finished, she asked for the check. The bill came to $14.50. Harper reached into her purse. She pulled out a $20 to cover the bill, and then she pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She slid it under the salt shaker. It wasn't charity. It was positive reinforcement. It was a message that kindness could be repaid, just as cruelty had been. She stood up, buttoning her coat. As she walked toward the door, she saw Chad buzzing a table near the back. He was scrubbing a sticky spot on the table, focused and diligent. He looked up, saw her leaving, and gave a small, awkward wave. Harper nodded back. She walked out of the diner and into the bright spring sunshine. The air was crisp and clean. She felt lighter than she had in months. The circle was closed. The balance was restored. She pulled out her phone and dialed. Hey, Ethan answered, his voice warm and familiar. You done with your shift? Yeah, Harper smiled, walking toward her car. I just had the best burger. And Ethan? Yeah? You were right, she said, looking back at the diner one last time. People can learn. Sometimes they just need to start from the bottom to see the view. I love you, Harper. I love you too. I'm coming home. And that brings us to the end of our story. From the high-stakes drama of the Obsidian Room to the humble reality of the Burger Barn, Chad Kensington learned the ultimate lesson. You reap exactly what you sow. Harper showed us that true power isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about holding your head high and letting the truth win. What did you think of the ending? Did Harper do the right thing by leaving that tip, or was she too nice? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story gave you the chills, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this with a friend who believes in karma, and make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.